Welcome to Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering from ELD's Time Vault Games. This is the top 8 of our January ELD Premodern Open. Also part of the tournament series, the New England Premodern Massachusetts Monthly. It is a mouthful. Happens every month here, typically the second Saturday of the month. They have been gaining in popularity. They've been sellouts the last 2 months. Actually had people playing in the Chinese restaurant across the way, or the crab rangoon bracket. Those lower tables got some free appetizers. Good times were had by all. Definitely something you can only do with the more laid-back community, such as Premodern. Would not be doing that with an RCQ, I can tell you that. But we had some people sign up that hadn't pre-registered online, and we accommodated them, made sure everybody had a good time. Black Vice starting out with Shane. That card is really difficult for control decks to get out from underneath. As we see here, Claire already down to 10. No plays aside from making land drops. If you're not putting out creatures and spells for them to counter targets for the removal, it can be very difficult for control decks to get cards out of their hand. We see Mishra's Factories trying to outrace Black Vice, but with 2 of them, it's going to be tough. Gix, a way of getting out from underneath your own stasis if necessary, though with Forsaken City probably won't be coming into effect. Forsaken City, one of those cards that really enables this archetype. You can play this in formats like Old School where Forsaken City hadn't been printed yet, but just the reusable blue mana during the upkeep, very potent. Mishra's Factory getting in there, turning sideways. Will Claire be able to get enough cards out of hand? Desperately low. Considering her options. We have a hard cast Decree of Justice, and Shane is going to go ahead and daze that. Paying the 1, and now a counter spell. Interesting. Interesting sequencing there. Claire totally tapped out, down to 2. Looks like she's going to have to get something out of her hand. So many cards that don't do very much. I believe earlier we may have missed a Swords to Plowshares on Claire's own Mishra's Factory. We did pass through swords. 2 damage coming in. Those factories still 2/2s underneath Humility. Stasis now locking Claire out, and that's a wrap. Not going to be able to get cards out of hand underneath a Stasis as Shane picks up game 1. Kind of as expected. We'll see what the sideboard has to offer. Getting back to the swing of things here with our slideshow. People learning the format. Cards like Daze and Counterspell can be taken for granted, but there are a lot of people getting into Premodern, and it's going to be some of their first exposure to these cards. It's not just a nostalgia format. It's really exceeding all expectations. We have people playing Premodern that were not alive when any of these cards were printed, and they are having a great time. Humility is one of those cards, creates a lot of judge calls, unfortunately does basically nothing in this matchup. Stasis isn't going to have any creatures. That Humility's basically just a brick in hand, easily sideboarded out. Stasis is the card. Makes it so those Black Vices eventually squeeze the life out of the opponent. We've got a counter spell from Shane. I don't love having to use counter magic on a creature. So it really depends on the texture of his hand in general. If you can manage to get out of Stasis, the creature isn't going to matter. Better off having a counter spell to fight over preserving the Stasis. Aura of Silence. Now this is a card that I snap counter. That is going to blow up your first Stasis and make it a terrible value play. You're going to have to pay 4 mana to get a Stasis out, and then it's going to go away anyways. We have an AK for 1. Oh no. Well, this is resolved. This could be bad for Shane. Suppose a Chain of Vapor may be able to bounce it prior to resolving a Stasis. A lot of utility out of that card. Of course, answering problem permanents. And a counter spell stopping this Black Vice. Not a great mana proposition when you're paying 3 mana. Your opponent counters it for only 2. So this is probably going to come down to bulk card advantage at some point. Not so much about the efficiency of the cards. Stasis is looking to lock things out. The back of the namesake card. And finally, the namesake card for Claire's Landstill deck here. We got a Standstill. Yeah, it is actually asymmetrical. Aura of Silence from an era where we would often see cards that would affect both players equally. However, Aura of Silence only screws over your opponent. Like an old school Lavinia. Your stuff costs 2 more. Accumulated Knowledge for 2 and Gush. Shane drawing a fistful of cards here. Claw of Gix going to cost 2 more. Does need to be careful about that. It is not a trigger like Chalice of the Void. You can definitely run afoul if you're intentionally not paying the extra 2. I don't believe that's at all what Shane is doing. Stand-up guy. Pleasure to have in the store. Just a straight-up counterspell on Fact or Fiction. For one of those cards that really enables Stasis, and it's one of the free counterspells that other decks don't really have access to. I mean, technically you can play it in different blue builds, but Stasis just has so many islands. It's all about continually feeding the Stasis, getting those islands back to hand once they're not going to be untapping is very welcome. Now, Shane actually hard cast Gush there, dealing with issues of maximum hand size. Gush is +1 card to hand, but when you're returning 2 islands, like a roided out Ancestral Recall. And just a baby Decree of Justice here. Getting a couple of bodies. Shane possibly considering Stifle? What am I seeing there? We have a Chain of Vapor got pitched. That is somewhat shocking. Now we have a counter spell. Over this mana short, this is going to be a key card. If Claire ends up being tapped out, he's going to be in a world of hurt. We have a Daze. And she is tapped out. Wins the counter battle. Doesn't matter if all your lands are tapped anyways. And now the Chain of Vapor is, in fact, getting rid of this Aura of Silence. And this might be it. Claire may never recover from this. A single Black Vice. She has 19 life. So close. She needs 2 factory hits. She's got the mana. Now she basically needs to draw 2 Mishra's factories to get out of the situation or somehow take care of this Stasis. If you can get that off the board and get an untap, she has lethal. Can she break free here in the top 8 to move on? Seal of Cleansing, that could do it. Thwart politely declines. There's the factory. Just needs another factory and the accompanying mana for the activation. It's a real decision whether or not to shoot in now. Get in the 2 damage. Chain of Vapor. Bounces the Stasis. Chain in the driver's seat here. It's his game to lose. We see now a null. Reason why Claire kept that mana open in case she wanted to be able to fight over a Stasis, but overwhelmed. Jane has drawn so many more cards. Pause in the action there. Claire continuing to fight. So close, but so far away. Stasis is a nightmare matchup for a lot of decks in this format. We have Chain of Vapor being fired off. And a counterspell stopping it. Tormod's is at least a card to get out of hand. And now we have Chain of Vapor, and then sacrificing a land to bounce the Tormods back to hand. Push through a little bit of extra damage, I guess. Stasis. Impulse. And at this point, Shane's just basically waiting for Claire to run out of gas. Have no choices left. But to just let those cards accumulate in hand and get suffocated by this black vice. Powder Keg. That can take care of a swing from Mishra's Factory. Powder Keg, one of those cards that received a printing later on in the form of Ratchet Bomb, which was very similar, and some would have said better. But Powder Keg, as it turns out, ends up being the better option as it can take out lands. Even when they're animated. Or when they're animated. Of course, Powder Keg's also very good versus artifact lands. Thankfully, those are not in this format. Claire forcing the issue, trading with the Powder Keg, losing her tokens. Not likely to get any better from there. Other Tormod's Crypt. Again, I think the majority of the utility of that card is just getting cards out of hand, trying to play through Black Vice. But at this point, Claire needs... I don't even know if she can do this from here. I mean, she needs to connect with 2 more Mishra's Factories. Fairy Conclave's never going to be able to untap. So she needs to either get rid of Stasis or get 2 connections with a factory. And I don't know if the factory is possible at this point. Chain of Vapor. Misdirection. The force of will of the format really doesn't see a ton of play. Card's incredibly good, especially at counter battles. But 2 cards traded for that Chain of Vapor, returned to Black Vice to hand. Replaying it. I mean, going to be able to keep this Stasis going all day thanks to these Forsaken Cities. Coastal Tower and Fairy Conclave. I mean, it's good that they're lands they can get out of hand, but the fact that they come in tapped, not exciting. There's a factory. Needs another factory and 2 more mana sources. Does she even have those in the deck? And no, Black Vice finally finishes the job as Black Vice slowly squeezes all the life out of Claire.